Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and in today's video we're going to be providing you with the top 11 builds of patch 13.19. This patch has allowed a lot of builds to actually creep into meta. There are a few outliers that will really help you increase your LP in the shortest amount of time. We're selecting primarily champions that are completely overpowered that are going to be nerfed in the next patch, so make sure that you abuse these builds while you can. We're going to be going role by role, starting with top lane. First and foremost, Garen is number 1 on our list. The reason for this is that Hullbreaker Garen is making a resurgence. Garen has a good matchup into Renekton, he has an okay matchup into Aatrox, and he does pretty well into Jax, but only if we abuse this one build. First and foremost, on Garen, we always want to rush boots for the sheer amount of attack speed that they grant. Next up, we want to follow this with a Stride Breaker. Stride Breaker is what allows Garen to excel at his game plan. We could use this immediately after casting our Q to slow somebody and make them tank our full E. We could use this to auto stride and then E somebody, to simply zoom away with Phase Rush. You get the idea. But immediately after Stride Breaker is what really makes this build take the cake, and it's Hullbreaker. Hullbreaker's passive, which grants us a whole bunch of armor and MR, is incredibly synergistic with Garen's high HP pool and his W. Our effective HP is way too high for most people to be able to kill us, and we're allowed to only take winning fights in a side lane. Garen does struggle in 5v5 team fights, so the Hullbreaker build helps Garen cement his role as a 1v1 extended skirmisher. What separates this from the normal build, however, is that we buy 2 Zeals after Hullbreaker and then finish a Deadman's Plate and then slowly complete our Zeals as the game goes on. Zeal gives us a percentage movement speed increase, which of course synergizes very well with both Phase Rush, the Stride Breaker's mythic passive, and our Deadman's Plate that we're going to end up picking up later on. This build is completely overpowered and you need to abuse it as fast as possible. Keeping with the theme, Yone with Hullbreaker is also a balance issue. This champion is a complete menace if we go Kraken into Hullbreaker, purely because Yone's one weakness is that he's very squishy. Berserker's Greaves into Kraken Slayer gives us enough 1v1 potential and damage throughout the early game to where we don't actually need another damage item. Instead, we complete a Hullbreaker as our 3rd item, and as we land our Ws, we gain access to a huge amount of effective HP. Depending on how high your attack speed is, you get 2 to 3 Ws over the course of a skirmish. This allows Yone to have a health pool of 4 to 5,000 once we complete Hullbreaker. The sheer amount of damage reduction that we get from the resistances here synergize incredibly well with the shield that we get from our W. If you don't know, resistances do apply to shields, which is why this Yone build is so strong. Instead of completing our Infinity Edge as our 3rd item, we want to go Hullbreaker and then Infinity Edge immediately after. This solves a lot of Yone's issues and turns him into an absolute monstrosity. This champion is going to receive nerfs if these items do not get changed. Just a quick reminder, if you ever want to learn any of the champions brought to you by this list, head on over to GameLeap.com by clicking on the description box below. I'll see you guys on the website. Now that we covered top lane, let's go ahead and talk about jungle. The biggest standout of this patch for sure has to be Briar, but not with the Goredrinker build. The Goredrinker build on Briar is by far her most common build, but it doesn't mean it's the most effective. In my opinion, the best way to play Briar is similar to a blue Kayn. You pick her into a team of 5 squishy champions, and you play Lethality Briar for W one-shots. The reason for this is her W does such a high amount of missing health damage. If our autos and our Q chunk people before we actually recast that W, there is no hope of them being able to fight back. What we want to do on Lethality Briar is a little bit different. We rush a Duskblade and then we immediately go into Axiom Arc as our 2nd item. Axiom Arc is completely underrated in the current state of the game. This item is picking up steam now. It's seeing a lot of play on Kha'Zix, on Talon, on Kayn, and for good reason. There is no stopping an Axiom Arc Assassin once they are relatively ahead. You can use your ulti to gank a lane, go kill that lane, return to your jungle, take 1 or 2 camps, and then your ulti's back up, ready to gank another lane. This build does fall off significantly harder in the mid game, but what makes it so strong is the one-shot potential paired with the global presence that Briar has. There is no other champion in the game that offers the amount of damage, stick potential, and global pressure that Briar does in the jungle. This champion is going to get nerfed again. She just got nerfed on this patch. Abuse this build while you can. Next up on our list is Bel'Veth. Bel'Veth is already confirmed for nerfs in 13.20 for good reason. She is the 2nd highest win rate jungler in the entire game due to a new build path that has been discovered on her. This build is really quite simple. All we do is complete a Kraken Slayer, then Resistance Boots directly into a Stride Breaker. This build path makes Bel'Veth incredibly sticky, gives her a huge amount of bonus damage in the early game from the on-hit effects, as well as tank stats due to the overbuffed health on Stride Breaker. When paired with your E's damage reduction, Bel'Veth is incredibly tanky, almost impossible to peel, and has the threat of hyperscaling always. Make sure that you abuse this build while you have the chance. Bel'Veth is already slated for nerfs for good reason. Next on our list is going to be Kha'Zix, but not with the traditional Duskblade rush. Instead, what we want to be doing on Kha'Zix jungle this patch is going first strike, rushing an Umbral Glaive immediately into Ionian Boots, and then we buy our Duskblade afterwards. As the next item, we go Prowler's Claw, but what's most important here isn't our itemization, it's our evolution order. Kha'Zix has once again defaulted to the Q, W, E evolution order. The Q allows you to 1v1 people, especially when paired with the Blackout passive on Umbral Glaive. Our W gives essentially a hard CC with how much it slows you for. This is a massive slow equivalent to almost a threshold in what it does, but it's an AoE and it also has high damage. If we follow this with either a Cyrilda's Grudge or a Prowler's Claw, then Kha'Zix still has the super high 1v1 pick potential, but because his items are so cheap, it's easy for us to hit these spikes earlier on in the game when paired with First Strike. We must go First Strike on this champion in order to see the most success. Now that we covered our junglers, let's go ahead and talk about Sylas. Sylas, this patch is frankly imbalanced. He has received some minor buffs which allow him to stray from mana items, so this opens up Night Harvester as an option, but what really makes Sylas a menace is the fact that he could still go Everfrost and doesn't lose lane as hard. He has a decent matchup into most of the popular mid champions. The only one that he loses to is Vex. Essentially, the rise of melees in the mid lane have brought Sylas back in full force, and if you're able to make use of multiple ultimates, this champion is definitely the best in the game for solo queue mid lane right now. So it's really up to you here with your build order. I would just recommend that we go mythic item straight away into Ionian Boots and then follow this with a Shadow Flame. Everfrost is a key component to Sylas's build because we're able to E Everfrost, Q E2, and then our Q2 will detonate, guaranteed. Sylas's Q2 has one of the highest AP ratios in the entire game because it does strike twice and it also has that delayed detonation. Riot previously nerfed Sylas to put a lot of his damage on that second detonation, which is why Everfrost is such a valuable item on him. However, if you are snowballing against an incredibly squishy team, Night Harvester is also a viable option. You will have mana issues with this build, but the sheer amount of damage and movement speed that it grants Sylas are nothing to laugh at. If you're playing Sylas jungle, play Night Harvester. If you're playing him in the mid lane as usual, then play Everfrost would be my recommendation. Just make sure that you either follow this with a Shadow Flame or a Zhonya's Hourglass so you're able to go in, stay in after blowing somebody up. Next up on our build list, I want to give an honorable mention to Lethality Kai'Sa. This champion is making a big impact this patch simply due to how efficient and effective this build is. You go Halo Blades, you rush an Umbral Glaive, you get your evolution super quickly, and then you're allowed to scale into the late game. The only reason that I would not recommend this build is because our other two builds are so standout. Jhin is the highest winner AD carry on this patch for good reason. This champion has received a fat buff to his ultimate's damage, and it is definitely showing. For Jhin, we have the luxury of being able to choose between crit or lethality. Crit Jhin is pretty strong with IE. Gale Force has been nerfed a couple of times, and that's allowing these lethality fringe builds to come back. If you're playing Jhin against a squishy team, I would highly recommend that you try out this build simply due to the amount of damage that it does. For our rune, we want to run Dark Harvest, and then we want to rush a Collector. The reason that we want to go Collector over a Youmuu's immediately is simply because Collector offers us better stats in the early game. Youmuu's isn't a bad item, but it has a conditional active, which is kind of hard to make use out of. For boots on Jhin, we always want to go Swifties because of Jin's 4th shot passive synergy with the movement speed that we get from them. And then next up, we want to go straight into Youmuu's Ghostblade as our third item. This will allow us to make the most out of Jin's ultimate shots. If we hit shots 2, 3, and 4, we will be able to kill any squishy champion 100-0. This is completely bonkers if you have decent accuracy, and definitely one of my favorite builds of the patch. I've played this a couple of times this patch. It's really funny when it does work out, but this build does lack against tanks. I would recommend going IE over Gale Force. Go Gale Force when they have important CC to dodge. Otherwise, I would say play Lethality Jhin. It's really strong this patch. You just have to take a little bit of a different setup. Next on our list is going to be Caitlyn. Lethality Caitlyn has also come back full force. This champion is not viable if we play her as a regular crit AD carry, simply due to how long it takes for her to scale. If you are in a lower elo, let's say like Silver to Emerald, where games are kind of decided before you're able to get items, Lethality Caitlyn is definitely the way to go. We want to go First Strike on this champion because we actually hit a point in this build where just our ulti is capable of 100-0ing certain champions. If they have like a squishy enchanter or a Senna even, you can straight up kill them with just your ultimate if we follow this build, and it's really simple. We rush a Collector, and then we go into Berserker's Greaves immediately after, and then follow this with a Youmuu's Ghostblade. Just make sure that we're using our ulti when our Youmuu's is fully stacked, so that way we're able to access the lethality passive from our Ghostblade. After this, we can go Axiom Arc into a Bloodthirster for a completely hilarious build. Just realize that you are more ability reliant than you are auto attack reliant. You want to weave autos where you can, but the trap combos are most important on this champ. This build is really strong if you're ever against an enchanter or a low pressure AD carry that has low range. Perfect to counterpick Vayne and Kai'Sa with. Now that we talked about our AD carries, let's go ahead and talk about our supports. Support builds on this patch are basically going to be the same as last patch. There's just a few exceptions here. On Bard, the best build to go is Guardian. we need to take Guardian on this champion, and this is what matters the most. Our itemization here doesn't matter as much, but if we take Guardian, our win rate goes up a flat 3% compared to every other rune. The best two mythics on Bard are going to be Locket and Radiant Virtue, but Radiant Virtue is pretty expensive, so I would recommend going Locket in the majority of your games. This will allow us to go Mobility Boots or Swiftness Boots, and then follow it immediately after with a Dead Man's Plate. Dead Man's Plate allows Bard to move around the map incredibly fast. It gives him tank stats, so he's actually able to walk up to people, and allows Meeps to go off consistently, so Bard is able to access most of his damage. Radiant Virtue Bard is good if you're against hard engage, and you need to be using your ulti to stop it. So if the enemy team has like a Rakan, a Malphite, some sort of engaged jungler like a Sejuani, then you can go Radiant Virtue, prevent your team from dying, and then also amplify their stats with the massive AoE heals that it does grant. This build is short and sweet for good reason. Now, last on our list is actually going to be Rakan. Rakan is still one of the best supports in the game for good reason, but a more aggressive build has been coming to light on him. Instead of building Rakan as a pure utility menace, we can go Redemption pretty early on in our build, and then with a well-placed RW, nuke the enemy team before they're able to react while healing our team. Rakan's best mythics are once again going to be Shirelia's and Radiant Virtue. Radiant Virtue is strong on Rakan for the same reasons that it's strong on Bard. It's really good for counter engage, but it is ultra expensive, so keep that in mind. It's usually better to build the cheaper item. Shirelia's into Ionians is the way to go on this champion, and then we can top off our build with Redemption. The way that we play this is a little bit different. We want to E onto a tank, ideally, turn on our ulti, get a W on 2 to 3 members of the enemy team, and then drop a Redemption directly on top of ourselves. This will nuke them for a massive percentage of their health as true damage, allow our team to continue fighting, and if we have Radiant Virtue, the healing that we exert in the mid game is far too high for a champion that has this amount of engage. This is a super fun build. I would recommend that you play this whenever you have a playmaking AD carry. If you have like a Vayne or something that is going to want to fight, this build is absolutely hilarious in what it provides for your team. There is no way for them to actually kill your carry, even if you're forced into a defensive situation, but it is not uncommon for Rakan to almost 100-0 a carry in the backline just with his RW combo, Ignite, and Redemption thrown in on top of it. This turns you from a pure utility champion into an almost AP assassin. Anyways, this was Unsung with Game Leak. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video.